If you want to learn how to make a .NET Web MVC API, then stick around. First thing we're going to do, launch Visual Studio, create a new project, search for API, make this ASP.NET Core Web API project and give it a name and create it. You can choose a .NET framework here. I'm choosing 6. Now a couple of these other options. HTTPS, you don't really need that for local testing. For production, you would need that. Okay. Use controllers is just giving us an MVC architecture. I'm leaving that on. Open API support is on. That will give us Swagger support. And I will create this. And out of the gate, it gives us a weather forecast demonstration. So you can see a class that represents a weather forecast data object here. And then under controllers, you can see a weather forecast controller, which has our typical CRUD operations. So this one only has a get. And what it's doing is just returning some hard-coded data that you can see up there. So out of the box, we can just run this without writing any code. What it does, it launches a web server locally and then opens it up in a browser. Okay, so you can see this right here. Weather forecast, you can click get, you can click try it out, and you can click execute, and you can see that it does indeed return us some JSON data. Secondly, you could go to this URL directly and get the data like that. All right, so let's suppose that we have some code already existing that manages some data. What I'm going to do, I'm going to add a file in here that represents a person object. So I'm just going to do this here. I'm going to add a person object like this, and I'm going to put a couple fields on here. I'm going to put an ID field. I'm going to make it a string because I plan on using GUIDs, and I'm going to do a name and a school. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to make a file manager that is simply going to simulate being able to store these records. So let me go ahead and change my person to a capital N because it looks like I used that, and a capital school. Now this class is simply simulated. This is just simulating the fact that you might want to write a bunch of person objects to a file, be able to add a person, edit a person, delete a person, get all the people or all the persons in a list, right? This is in a singleton, and this is, oh my gosh, dump. I put my namespace wrong. This is just making the assumption that you have some kind of code that already does this. Most of the time this would be in a database, but for simplicity's sake, if you don't have that, then this is just showing how we would maybe do this with a file manager singleton. So we have our CRUD operations here to be able to do operations on this person, to add them, edit them, delete them, and get them all. All right, so what I'll do next is add a controller. Now controllers are what are going to handle the web interfaces. So out of the box, we get this web API controller. We don't really need this one anymore, but we'll come back to it just to look at it. So you can go to controllers, you can right click, add. Now this is where you can get screwed up. If you add just a regular controller here, it will add a web page controller that will return HTML. Okay, and we don't really want that. What we want is this up here, this API. Okay, and there's lots of options, right? So if you do web API controller, it will just make an empty one with no code in it. This one will make one with read write actions. This one will make one with read write actions using Entity Framework. Entity Framework is like an abstraction for databases. Right here, this one is API controller with endpoints given a model class. So that may or may not work for you depending. I'm going to use this one right here, the second one, API controller with read write actions. So I'll add this, we'll give it a name, and I will call it person controller. So it is a naming standard to use the word controller in the file names. Okay, so out of the box, we see that we get these functions here. Okay, so you can see we do a get, and this will get all of them. Okay, so we see it returns an IEnumerable, and an IEnumerable is just kind of a more generic type that is able to enumerate over things or go through things one by one like a list. But the difference is this is read only. So this is nice to ensure that nobody can add to the list that's returned here. We want to go through our manager that we made here, right? So that we persist things properly. So this is returning a list of strings. This is returning, let's see, this is if you pass something in and you want to get a specific item. But again, it's just hard-coded to return strings here. Right here, it's doing a post. It's posting a string, right? Putting some values here. So if we just run this, we can see out of the gate, we get at least a web API set up for us, but it's not really returning any functional data. Okay, so we can see with get, this will get all of them. You can click try it out, click execute, and it returns these two hard-coded values called value1 and value2. Now when we try this one, it'll just return the word value, and that's this one right here. Okay, so you can certainly pass something in, right? We'll hit try it out, pass something in, pass in 1, 2, 3 or something, but again, it just ignores it and returns the word value. And here we see post and put, and we have the same thing. So let's just pass some data and make sure we're getting some data sent into us. Okay, so I'm gonna just put a breakpoint right there. Okay, so what's cool is you can do this web development and still step through code line by line if you want. So I'm at this one right here, this get person, passing this in, 1, 2, 3, I'll click execute. We can see we get a breakpoint. We can mouse over and we can see that 1, 2, 3 is shown there. Okay, so I'll click stop. And just for fun, what I can do, I can say, change this code you sent in 1, 2, 3, or I'm sorry, whatever they put. Just do this ID. So we'll just return that back as a string. All right, we'll run that. All right, do this one and click try it out. All right, do 1, 2, 3, and it says you sent 1, 2, 3 right there. We can also try this directly in a browser, right? So it gives the exact URL, and we can see that data sent in like that. All right. So we do not want to pass strings around. We want to pass around objects that are of the person type. So again, we kind of come to this file manager here, and we can kind of assume that this thing is written and it works and it's functional, and we're going to rely on this. So right here, when we say get, what I can do is say file manager dot instance dot get person list is what I call this. So that's a list of people, and I can simply return this. And what we need to do is make it so it returns a list or IEnumerable list of person, not list of string. Okay. And I have some simulated data here, so I can run this. I can hop into here. I can say get, do try it out, execute, and this is the list that I returned, right? And here is this thing. It automatically serializes this for you. Okay. So when we go and look at my code, notice that I am returning a list of person, right? So this is simulated. It doesn't really read a file or anything like that. But notice it is just returning a list of person. And then I come here, right? And it's returning, right? There. I don't have to worry about deserializing, at least at this level. Okay, serializing or deserializing. That is automatically set up in the configuration to do that for us. Next, we look at this one here, this get. Next, we look at this one here. This is a get, and we can basically search for a person. So we would pass in the ID. Now, my person uses a string for an ID. Okay, so I would want to make sure I'm passing in a string. Okay, and what I would do is I would use my file manager and I would call my get person by ID function here, and we can simply return this person. Now it's trying to autocomplete to be .name because it's seeing this is still returning a string, but I'm going to leave it like that. And now we want to return a single person. Okay, so over in my file manager, I think I have it simulated here. It just returns hard-coded person here. Okay, so we can run this and we can try our get. Okay, so we've already done this one. Let's try to do this one here. So we can kind of simulate that I have a person with the string ABC. We can click execute and we can say, hey, here's your person. And they don't have a school set, but that's okay, right? Okay, now let's look at adding a person. We would want to add a person using the post method, and we would not want to pass a string. We would want to pass a person in, and I'll just call it P for person. Now here's the deal. I don't want the user to pick their own ID numbers. They're certainly welcome to send one. We could, of course, write in the specification that it's ignored or make them an object that they pass in without, an ID. We could make a new object called person, no ID, or there's lots of ways to do this. What I'm going to do is just simply ignore whatever ID they send in. I'm going to set it to be a new GUID like that. And then what I'm going to do now is use my file manager that I've already written, and I will add a person P right there. Okay, now what do we return? Well, there's lots of things you can do. You can return error codes. One of the things that would be nice to know is the ID of the person that was added. So a lot of times the client needs that. So you could simply return a string and say, hey, here is the ID of the person that was just added. Or if you want, you could return the whole entire object. Now, if it's a giant object, you probably don't want to do that. But if it's, small like this, it's probably fine. So I'll just return this object. So, whatever I pass in, I'm going to get it back, but I'm going to get a different ID on it because the server is going to pick the ID. So we'll try that here. So we'll do post. We'll do try it out. Okay, we'll go into here. We'll put an ID in. I'll call it ABC. Name, I'll put Joe. School, I'll put my school. Okay, I'll click execute, and the response we get back is here. Okay, and we can see that this is the ID it's using, right? And this is my object. And continuing on. Here we see a put, which is an edit. So for this one, you can see the default is that it passes in an ID. Okay, but our ID is a string, so we're going to uniquely identify by a string, and then we're going to pass in a person object. So this is the ID of the one we want, and this is going to be the fields of the new person. So we'll use our file manager again, and we will do an edit, and we're going to pass in an ID and a person, and internally in here I don't let it change the ID. We never really want to let a user change the ID number. I'm making a video.
I forget what you told me to do now when it beeps.
So inside my file manager here, it just returns a Boolean here. So we can do something like this. If this is true, we can figure out what logic we want to do. Do we want to return a true? Do we want to return a success? Do we want to return what was sent in? So we have to just decide what we want. So just for something different, let's just return a Boolean like that. And we can try this one out. So this is a put. So we can pretend that, hey, I want to look for person with ID ABC, right? And then again, this would be the value of the one you're looking for. Now, if you were going to let users change the IDs, you could put it in here. I'm going to ignore that no matter what. As you saw, this would be the new name. This would be the new school, right? And we can try that out, and all we get is a success there, right? So we returned a Boolean. And the last one is just a delete, right? We send an ID of the delete we want to send in. So what would we do? We would, use our file manager, and we would call our delete routine, and we would pass in the ID of the one we want to delete. And you can see this returns a Boolean, right? So we can simply return a Boolean like such. And the delete should send in a string since we're using GUIDs for the IDs. And if we want to delete something, we could just put in the ID of the one we want, execute it, and this would say true. And of course, this is simulated. Okay. Now, you'll notice that you'll notice in the edit, it sends the ID as part of the URL, and it sends the new person as the body. So let's take a look at that one. So we're looking at this right here. So notice this is the URL /API/person, right? So when we do a get, we say, give me person number or person with ID ABC123. We do that. It says, oh, here you go. Here's the person, right? So we can do that directly with the URL. So some of the data is passed right in the URL, ABC123. So if I open a new browser and I type API person ABC123, you can see that this thing is returned. Now, for the put, notice that we have a put. We put the ID of the one we want to pass in is going in the URL right there. Okay, so it codes it out for us. So this is, I'm just going to say old ID right there. And down here, we would have new ID, we would have new name, and we would have new school. Okay, and the difference is this is called the body, and you can't just go and type this stuff up in the URL. Okay, it's sent in a different part called the body. So I click execute. We see that our URL is right here. And this old ID kind of matches what I put in up there. Okay, and so where does this stuff go? This is a piece of JSON data that goes in something called the body. So what this does, behind the scenes, it uses curl. And what it does, it just simply adds that as part of the content body there. Okay. And we're not able to just use a browser and do this. We would have to make like a form and make form fields and make a text box and another text box, a submit button, and submit it here and submit this as part of the form data. Okay, so you can see that right there. Now, you don't have to do it like that. It's just the way it stubs it out for us. So if we wanted to, we could simply change that and say, I don't want to send that in the URL. I want to just send it as part of the body, and it'll look it up by this person P here, right? So maybe you want to do something like this, but it kind of doesn't make sense because it doesn't know which one to edit. So I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, and one of the things is you can only send in one parameter with from body. So if you have something complicated to send in, you'd have to wrap it all up in one object. So you can't just put another from body like in front of that one. So this covers just making a very simple web API using a person object. The next steps would be to make a client that consumes this. So luckily for us, it does make this kind of example client for us, but we would want to maybe make another completely different application that uses this. All right, and we can make it also hit our local host, our local machine, and then after that, we can put this server on the cloud.